Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. This is President Richard Atwater. Welcome to our teleconference and central meeting, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we wanted to provide an update about public comment. An effort to streamline the process for the public and incorporate best practices, we are now handling public comment requests through an online request form. Ms. Claudia Rodriguez, can you please provide an overview of how the new process works?
Thank you, President Atwater. So we are actually putting out this online form that will facilitate in tracking and also more efficiently capturing public comment requests. This mimics the original form that we used to have at the in-person meetings, and so we anticipate it working exactly the same way. And the link is provided in the agenda. It is tiny URL, and we have it listed in two separate places here on the agenda before the agenda items and also in the public comment section as well. And if there's any questions with regards to how to complete the form, anyone could reach out to me and I will try and assist them through the process.
Great. Thank you, Claudia Rodriguez. And based on this, please make sure you fill and submit a form online by about 2:15. And we will try to do best we can to provide you an opportunity to. We're also accepting written comments, and all written comments should be emailed to Ms. Claudia Rodriguez before the conclusion of the meeting. They will be included in the record of this meeting today. And with that, to move on to item 2, roll. Start, Claudia, the roll call.
All right. President Atwater.
Present.
Director Palmer.
Here.
Director Stamera.
Here.
Director Blois.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum.
Great. We'll move on now to the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will, I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic
which stands
one nation
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty
and
and justice.
justice for all.
Thank you all. Let's move on to public comment at this point in time. Do we have any requests? Claudia, how do you want to handle it?
Let's see. So, Director Atwater, we don't have any public comments for item number 4. We do, however, have 4 other agenda items.
Okay.
So when we get there, I will advise.
Great, thank you. Agenda item 5 is approval of the minutes.
Okay, I had something. I went over with Claudia some of my changes to the minutes, and I think that she'll probably make sure we get that at some point. I did want to bring up, I think it was on, let's see, it was when we were talking about, yes, the striking the last sentence of the bylaw update. And I believe that was on page 2 of the minutes. So let me get down there. I forget what page it was. Page 1, page 2. Yeah, it was page 6 of the agenda packet. And basically we were clarifying I made a comment about if a member agent joins the DCA late, they shouldn't, you have to pick which seat the board they will reside in. So I suggest striking the last sentence in the bylaws, and Mr. Nelson confirmed that it could be done. However, it doesn't say if we actually agreed to strike that last sentence. So I believe if we did agree to strike that last sentence, it should be stated there in the minutes, and then it should be a move to pass the as amended, updating the bylaws officers' terms.
And Director Palmer, I can confirm that was the motion, and we can update the minutes accordingly. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
make sure it has as amended, and that the minutes basically state that we all agreed to strike that last sentence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and I assume that's your motion to approve the minutes with those edits. We have a second?
Second.
All right, Director Tony Estramera is the second. Please call the vote.
Yep. Director Atwater,
Yes.
Looks great.
Director Palmer,
Yes.
Director Samara,
Yes.
Director Blois.
Yes for all three.
All right.
Are we doing all three at once or just one at a time?
That was just approve them all at once.
Okay.
All right. Passed unanimously. Approved.
All right, we will move on to agenda item 6, the consent counter, and we had a request for a comment on this, and that it should be not a consent counter item. So I'll turn it over to our legal counsel, Joshua Nelson.
Thanks, President Atwater. Yeah, I'm happy to provide a brief staff report on this item. So the item before you is amendment number 3 to the joint exercise of powers agreement, DWR. As the board's well aware, the JEPA, as we call it, is really the second most important agreement that the DCA has. The first, of course, being the JPA that formed it, and the JEPA sets forth the work and services that we are providing in DWR during the planning phase. That's assisting them with engineering and related work in as they undergo consideration of a potential Delta Conveyance project. Amendment number 3 really breaks down into 3 different types of edits to the agreement. Those related to the budget process, an update on funding, and then some cleanup edits. Starting with the first, the JEPA revises how we will handle the DCA budgets going forward. And so historically, what has happened is this board has approved our annual fiscal year budget, and then it is submitted to DCO DWR for approval. In an effort to streamline the process and ensure that we're integrating their comments as soon as possible, what we are proposing to do is sort of flip that so that DCO will be involved in preparation of the budget and will approve it before it goes to this board for consideration and approval. And we would propose that budget amendments be handled in that same fashion, where amendments are first considered and approved by DCO and then brought to the board for approval. Another item in the amendment related to the budgeting process is contracts and task orders. So the JEPA amendment proposes to require DCA to coordinate with DCO related to approval and edits to those agreements. And then DCO approval would be also required, but the approval would be focused on whether, 1, the contractor amendment is consistent with the approved budget, and it'd be the process I just discussed, and 2, that it's otherwise consistent with DWR's direction for Delta Conveyance as a program. Moving on to the funding, the JEPA amendment includes an increase in the DWR initial contribution, which is helping funding DCA work to date. As this board knows, and as we've stated in the past, this is just temporary funding that is assisting the DCA until the participating water agencies are able to provide more long-term funding for the planning phase. And so, as a reminder, this project is not being funded by DWR general funds. It's just temporary funds that will be reimbursed by the participating water agencies. Then the last portion of the amendment is just some cleanups. Those relate to clarifying how invoices will be processed, consistent with some of the changes we made to the task order review. Some cleanups to the annual report, which had previously been done on a calendar year basis. DCO is now functioning on a fiscal year basis, and we think the report should follow that. And then a couple of other just little cleanup items. So that is all I had, but I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Yes. Here, the members have a question. I know we've discussed this in the past. It's just really administrative cleanup items. Do we have a motion?
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, President Atwater, we should confirm there's a public comment on this item.
Yeah, there may be
Okay.
public comment.
Yeah, we do have public comment. I'll go ahead and acknowledge that Tony made a motion, and if we have a second,
I'll
Second.
second.
and Sarah seconded it. And now I'd like to invite the public comments. Claudia, would you please introduce who that is?
Yeah, so Director Atwater, we do have two public comments. It is Molly Colton and followed by OSHA Meserve.
Good.
Hi, this is Molly Colton with Sierra Club California, and we request that all discussion of finance be moved from the consent calendar for public comment and input. The public has the right to know what DWR is financing, especially given budget impacts and constraints due to COVID-19 and the recent wildfires in California. Members of the public and people who will be impacted by these projects deserve a complete and transparent financing story. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
OSHA Meserve.
Got it.
There's another one that was sent in yesterday. So there's another, Barbara Berrigan-Priya was also waiting to make a public comment. I sent it to Claudia yesterday.
Yes,
So-
we email, so I appreciate that. We'll after OSHA member.
Hi, should I go now then? This is OSHA.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead, OSHA.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, no, and I appreciate taking it off the consent just so there could be a fuller discussion of it. I agree with what the previous commenter mentioned about that. Also, for purposes of full disclosure and whatnot, I think providing in the future and providing some kind of red line and making sure that the prior documents that are being revised are available would be very helpful for the public. I was able to scrap together the different pieces and try to understand them a little bit, but I think that, you know, it should be a little easier. I do think that there is the potential for environmental impacts associated with receiving additional funding from DWR. It's increasing the amount that of so-called temporary funding from 26.7 million to 33.8 million. So that's an additional $6 million. I think there is a credible dispute as to whether it's appropriate for DWR to advance funds for a project that has not been reviewed or approved and is not, as far as we believe, part of the state water project at this time. So I disagree that it should be exempted from CEQA under a general rule that there's no potential for environmental impacts. I still think that there needs to be more clarity about why DWR is putting forth money into a project, you know, at this stage in order to keep DCA going forward. And kind of the concern, big picture, is that it's, you know, more and more funds going into a project that is basically creating more momentum around doing a project because we're continuing to dump money into it before it's ever been properly reviewed under CEQA. So, you know, I appreciate the discussion, but I think, you know, I would ask that the JEPA not be amended to allow this additional funding, and that if you know, DCA is going to move forward and need money to do these activities, that the DCA members themselves should directly fund those activities, and that it should not be coming through DWR and potentially taking away funding from other important projects like maintaining the current state water project. Thanks.
Thank you for those.
Director Atwater, we have Barbara Berrigan-Perella that would like to also provide comment.
Yes, and we received her request in email yesterday. Go ahead, Barbara.
Just first off, President Atwater, thank you for recognizing me. We're having a really hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Through the system. That's okay. But there's something's not working with the microphones. Thank you for moving this item from consent to discussion. I agree with all the comments that have been made by Molly Colton and OSHA Meserve. But I want to add one other part. Whether we agree or disagree with you that this project and this change through the amendment is subject or not subject to CEQA, we were promised by the Newsom administration and DWR and representatives from the DCA that everything was going to be very transparent this time around. If you're going to advance money from DWR, spell it out. Make it easy for people to understand. Keep a running total. Make the documents accessible. Be very straightforward about how things are being handled. Because the public has a right to know, especially during difficult budget times. We know the water districts are impacted with what's happening with COVID. We know state budgets are impacted with what's happening with COVID. If this project is as necessary and does everything you say it's going to do, then be transparent about it. Think about which projects have really kind of stuck in the back of the throat for Californians, projects that people do not agree with, and all of it almost always gets bound up with lack of transparency regarding finances. So I can't stress this enough. Make it easy for the public to understand. We don't want to go back into a PRA war with you. We want to understand what's happening, and if we disagree, we disagree. But you have to make it understandable and clear and easy to access for everyone. Thank you.
I appreciate those comments. And I assume we don't have any other public comments on this agenda item?
Not at this time, Director Atwater. And I just got a note that if we could ensure that your volume is all the way up on your mic.
It is. I will speak louder.
Okay, thank you.
It helped when you got a little closer to it. I had
I
something.
can use my eyes and not my nose, but it gets so close. I'm teasing. Very good. I'll speak up. A little bit hard to know the receiver, what the volume is, but we do have a motion in a second. So
Rich, I just had something to say, if I could.
Go ahead.
Okay, one of the comments was looking at a red line version, and I know that we've done that occasionally in our agency where we've had red line versions of things, and I know some of the the things that we get red line versions, and I do find those to be useful. So just as a maybe going forward when we're doing a revision of something, redlining and with the revision would be a very it would be a transparent thing and make it easy for everybody to understand what's happening.
Yeah, Rich, I agree. In fact, I agree with the speakers. I think it's important for us to make sure that we share all the information. And as the last speaker said, whether we agree or disagree on anything, we do need to be more transparent. So I know it's a little extra, but yeah, I think we need to do that. Those of us that are operating with these with these documents, we see the details, we know the details, but the rest of the folks that haven't been dealing with it straight up haven't seen it, and the public's entitled to see it. So I appreciate the comments.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that it's always just to know the changes by looking at a red line version of before and after, and this is the third amendment, and you can lose track of if you don't see the changes over time. So that's a pretty reasonable request. Any your comments? Well, then why don't we go ahead and call for the vote?
Director Atwater?
Yes.
Director Palmer?
Yes.
Director Stamera?
Aye.
Director Blois?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
We'll move on to agenda item 7, our staff discussion items. The first one is 7A, August DCA monthly report. Information item, and we can see it coming up on the screen now for anybody who's on the web page. It's our monthly board report for August.
So President Atwater, you have the first monthly report for our new fiscal year, and it reflects the new $34 million budget that was approved at our last board meeting. And actually at the June board meeting, apologies. I'd like to just give a slight shout out to the controls team. We've just launched the new e-builder system that we had talked previously about, and have now inserted all of our master contracts and task orders. All of our commitments are now in there. So this is actually the first report where we've been able to have a full accounting system that can produce our data fields. As I said, we've got a budget of 34 million, and so far we have completed committing approximately 31 million. Those are in the new task orders and residual contract values from previous years. We had one budget change request. We had identified an error in one of the line items around payment to the SEC members, and corrected that with a transfer from our unallocated funds, but again, remain under the 34 million. And there was a comment at the last meeting to reconcile last year's budget, and as we finish wrapping up processing all of the invoices and costs from the previous fiscal year, we plan to include that hopefully in next month's agenda. I'd be glad to take any questions you may have on the new report.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that report. Any questions from members of the board?
None here.
Steve, you have a question? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I said I'm fine with it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, well, let's move on to 7B then. And this is a DCA leadership spotlight, Graham Bradner.
Yep, Graham, are you?
I'm here, yep.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, you steam. Is it hot?
Just tell me when you're ready, Claudia.
Whenever you are.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present some information to the board. I'm Graham Bradner, as was mentioned. I'm the DCA lead for forebays and levees. Next slide, please, Claudia. So I'm going to talk you through first some of my background and experience, and then role on the Delta Conveyance project. So just as in terms of education and registration, I've got a bachelor's in geology and a master's in hydrogeology, both from Clemson University. And then I'm a California licensed professional geologist, engineering geologist, and hydrogeologist, as well as a certified project management professional. I am a vice president and member of the board of directors at GEI Consultants. Been a part of GEI since 2005, located in the Rancho Cordova office, so local to Sacramento. In the West, GEI specializes in major water resources infrastructure projects. We cover everything from planning all the way through design and construction. Got a couple very relevant projects here shown on the side. So the upper picture there on the right side, that was actually just taken last week. So for anyone who lives in the area of Sacramento, they know what's going on. There's some substantial levee improvements happening right now to the Sacramento River levee on the east side of the levees. They're down along the pocket area. And that's actually construction of a deep seepage cutoff wall along that levee just downstream of Garshadun Park. So that's a project I've worked on since 2013, and we're now into construction with the Corps of Engineers. And so that's ongoing work. And then below that, another picture I wanted to highlight. This is from Oroville, from the Spillway Recovery Project. We had several individuals in a variety of different important positions on that project. We had someone functioning as the deputy PM for we also had the geotechnical engineer of record that stamped and signed all of the geotechnical designs for that project, for both the main spillway, the FCA chute, as well as the emergency spillway. So anyway, that's a picture of the secant pile construction as part of the emergency spillway. So point being, we really specialize in big, high scale, high level water resources infrastructure work. My personal experience, I've got a lot with levees, evaluation, design, and construction, as well as embankment dams, spillway assessments. As you can imagine, coming out of Oroville, there was a big push to evaluate spillways across the state. And so I, as part of a team, evaluated a number of concrete chute spillways for the types of conditions that occurred on Oroville. As part of those levee and embankment dam studies, I typically get involved in a lot of seepage and slope stability analyses. We also do a lot of flood planning, or a lot of planning studies. And so I've been involved in a range of flood planning studies for the state of California, as well as groundwater and drought studies. And then lastly, kind of one of my personal favorites, production well design and construction. I really enjoy putting those big, large diameter wells in and getting those up and running. So that's just a summary of what we do and what project experience I've got overall. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to highlight a few significant projects that I think directly translate over to Delta Conveyance. First, starting on the flood planning and evaluations. Many of you are probably familiar with DWR Flood Safe California. This was a system-wide initiative triggered by, really right after Katrina occurred. There was a massive effort to really take a system-wide approach to reduce flood risk for the state of California. There were several projects that were underneath that very broad umbrella. Here I'm highlighting three. First, the DWR Urban and Non-Urban Levee Evaluations Program. I was involved in that project from the beginning in 2006 all the way to the end in 2015. I was the project manager for 5 separate study areas on that project. 3 of the urban, there were a total of 12 urban study areas. I was the PM for 3 of those, and then 2 additional non-urban study areas. I was also the technical lead for the statewide and regional flood management plans that were prepared as part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in 2012, and then the 2017 update. And then more recently, DWR issued a series of grant opportunities for small legacy communities that were not really included in the more detailed non-urban levee evaluations programs because they didn't meet the criteria set for that work. And so there was a range of an opportunity to pursue and conduct feasibility studies for these small communities. I was the project manager for GEI for the Rio Vista community study, and then also I helped to lead studies for 8 other small communities, several within the Delta and a few more in Northern California. So then moving on to design and construction projects, I'm highlighting a few here that I think really speak to our capabilities here locally. The Bear and Feather River setback levees and in-place repairs. This was for the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority. The 3 rivers being Yuba River, Feather River, and Bear River, just north of Sacramento. So that work began in 2008 with the Bear River setback levee, and then followed by the Feather River setback and in-place repairs. As I mentioned, the Sacramento River East Levee Improvement Projects, those were initially for the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, and more recently they've transitioned over to the Corps of Engineers for implementation. I was involved in that project from 2013 all the way up until I became more deeply involved in Delta Conveyance. And then highlighting a couple of Delta specific projects. The special projects opportunity program has allowed us to upgrade several of the levees within the Delta, first to HMP standards, and then beyond that to, in some cases, Bulletin 19282. We have district engineer representation for Bethel Island and Hotchkiss Tract, and have really been helping those communities, those districts upgrade their levees. So my role on those projects, develop broad investigation and testing programs, in some cases very large scale programs, I've led evaluation and design efforts, including existing conditions analyses, development of repair alternative analyses, and detailed design, develop plan specifications, cost estimates for all those repairs and remediations, conducted construction inspections associated with those repairs, and then numerous technical presentations for anybody who wants to listen, really. Next slide, please. So my role on Delta Conveyance is to lead the forebay and levee team. We're responsible for addressing all flood risk mitigations, establishing forebay configurations and components. And then with my planning background, I've been leading a lot of the siting study efforts for major surface elements such as shafts and material depots, any of the large scale surface features. I've been leading those siting studies. We're responsible for the development of all the conceptual designs related to those flood risk mitigation and forebay features, and then supporting all of the outreach efforts that has been ongoing on the program. Next slide, please. Some key accomplishments that I'd like to highlight here. We have performed an updated levee vulnerability evaluation. And so what you see on the right side of the screen is a depiction of those updates. This is using the most recent LiDAR provided by DWR. This was collected at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And what I'm highlighting in the image here is all the levees that we evaluated for geometric conditions. And this is comparing their existing geometry to the range of geometric standards within the Delta, H&P, PL 8499, and 19282. So we've recently completed that updated analyses and have been using that in considering what flood risk mitigations might be appropriate throughout the project and for various project alternatives. Developed the siting methodology and criteria for all the surface elements. That really started with what was the former intermediate forebay, and then has been translated to citing shafts, citing all sorts of different surface elements. So we've been able to carry that methodology through the program and use it pretty consistently as we're looking at citing different features. We have developed design concepts for any of the levee modifications or improvements or forebay facilities associated with the project. A couple of system-wide studies that we've really dug into, have conducted a project-wide soil materials mass balance for the entire project. So tracking all the different soil materials required at all the different locations, where they're coming from and going to, and then also tackling the post-construction land reclamation. So this is taking land that's affected by construction, but not part of the permanent footprint, and what it's going to take and the effort that it's going to take to put that land back into productive use. And then summarizing all of this information and providing it to the permitting team for consideration in the environmental document. So that's a summary of key accomplishments that I'm proud of as part of the levee and forebay team. And at this point, I welcome any questions. And again, thank you very much.
Great summary, good presentation. Any questions from members of the board?
So this is Director Boyce. Thank you, Graham, for a great presentation. Very, very impressive resume. Is there anything technically challenging that you see potentially in this project that presents incredible difficulties, or would you characterize this more as a run-of-the-mill project or somewhere in between?
I think I'm going to go somewhere in between, Director Boyce, but I think right now one of the key challenges we have is the amount of available information. I mean, we're working in some cases without as much information as we'd certainly like, but I think we can, given where we are in the program, we're working at concept level and feeding the environmental process. We certainly have the ability to make use and make do with what we have, but I think as the project moves forward, it's obvious there's going to be a need for a lot more site-specific data. So I think that's one of the key challenges right now.
And thank you for that answer. Would you, as a follow-up, would you characterize the work that we're currently doing?
Yes. Graham, I got a quick question. How often will you be providing us with updates with your work?
As often as you'd like. I think it's as often as I'm requested to provide it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, realizing like a quarter, or how often do you think it would be, what would be useful?
On the work that we're doing, I think quarter is probably, I'd be glad to update you quarterly, but I think in terms of the progress that we're making, and there's a lot going on with the program, I'm sure there's others that could share impactful information. So I think something probably a little less frequent than quarterly, but I would welcome the opportunity anytime.
Well, I'll leave it to you then to decide when it's appropriate, because obviously, when we, there's important to communicate to not just to the board, but to the broader public.
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely. So I think when we pass key milestones, I think it would be particularly valuable.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
And President Atwater, if I might add, those key accomplishments that he talked about, those were the basis of content for SEC meetings that we've had to date. Graham is one of the more frequent presenters at those meetings because of the importance of the work that he's doing and relevance to the overall program.
Yeah, and that's important to know. You're also doing that at the stakeholder engagement, and so it's getting to a wider audience.
Yeah.
Great.
I think some of your information is really useful in terms of, especially with the folks we've heard from the SEC. One of the real concerns is the levies and the levy upkeep and the vulnerability of those. So your work on this is crucial.
Great.
No,
I agree.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Any
I
other
appreciate the opportunity.
Then let's move on to the next staff. Hello, can you hear
We're
me?
on 7C.
7C.
Okay, so 7C is the cost assessment presentation, but President Atwater, before I get started, Tony Myers, who is the Executive Director of the Delta Conveyance Office, would like to make a few introductory remarks.
Okay. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, President Atwater and Directors of DCA. My name is Tony Myers, and as Catherine stated, I'm the Executive Director for Department of Water Resources, Delta Conveyance Office. The Department of Water Resources and the Delta Conveyance Office would like to commend Catherine, Mallon, and the DCA staff for the excellent work that they performed to date and the thorough and professional methods that they have used in the preparation of this initial, although very early, cost assessment for the Delta Conveyance program. While planning and design of the program are in the very early stages, this information is intended to aid the beneficiary public water agencies who are ultimately responsible for funding the planning, environmental review, permitting, and, if approved, the design and construction of the proposed Delta Conveyance facility. This cost information developed at this very early stage provides a preliminary starting point to understand the program's probable costs, which will be refined over time, and the planning and environmental review proceeds and more precise design and engineering become available, which will increase confidence and probability levels of potential costs based on industry standards of cost estimating methodologies. Additionally, items not included in the estimate at this time, because they are currently undeveloped, will need to be quantified in the future as this program progresses to create a more comprehensive assessment of total program costs. I would also like to note that this cost assessment is related to the proposed project as it was identified in the notice of preparation and is not an indication of any type of project approval by the Department of Water Resources. DWR has made no decisions as to the selection of a specific alternative, as the program planning and design are still in the initial conceptual design phase, and alternatives are still being studied. A final decision regarding whether to approve the proposed Delta Conveyance project or an alternative, including the no project alternative, will not occur until after completion of the environmental review under CEQA and NEPA and other environmental permitting processes have been completed. And that concludes my introduction of this item, and I would like to now turn the mic back over to Catherine for her presentation of the Delta Conveyance Program Cost Assessment Update. Catherine.
Thank you, Tony. So board members, the following presentation that I am going to share with you now. Let me take over control here. All right, and then I need to put it into hide presenter view. There we go. How's that look to everybody? Hello?
That looks pretty good.
Okay, excellent. Ran into technical glitches yesterday. All right, so following presentation represents a snapshot in time of an assessment of the DCA program costs for Delta Conveyance. Estimating will be an ongoing effort throughout the design phase, and today's update represents the expected cost of design and construction of the program at this very, very early stage in the design development process. So during this presentation, I want to cover the following 6 topics. I'll describe the scope of the project that was estimated and the process that we used to create this number. We'll present an assessment of our estimated costs and include confidence levels in the generated number. We'll also describe some of the major scope advancements that have occurred in the last year since DCA began its engineering work, and end with future steps that will be necessary to ultimately create a proposed budget for the 20-year Delta Conveyance Capital Program. So it's important that I'm clear on what this cost assessment is and what it is not. First, the estimate is merely a snapshot, as I said, of the potential cost based on the current status of our work. And again, we are very early in this effort. Ideally, this assessment would have been prepared upon conclusion of our conceptual design efforts, but as Tony Myers mentioned, water contractors will be looking to go to their board soon to decide participation, and costs will be a critical part of that decision. And this is an undiscounted estimate, similar to the method that was used in previous estimates, which helps facilitate comparisons. Undiscounted means that it has not been adjusted for the time value of money and does not account for potential escalations that will occur between today and the start of construction and throughout the period of construction. As for what this assessment is not, the estimate is not reflective of our final concept design work. This is still in progress and design changes are ongoing at this time. The estimate does not represent the final expected mitigation costs. These actions and associated costs will be developed by DWR during the upcoming CEQA and NEPA processes. The estimate is not inclusive of all components of the program, but rather focuses more narrowly on the costs associated with design and construction, which also includes the DWR oversight of the DCA. Many key items such as community benefit funds or DWR planning costs have not been assessed at this time. And finally, as an undiscounted estimate, this assessment does not include the time value of money, and these calculations will be made as the DCA prepares its baseline capital plan for the program, which will be submitted to both DWR and this board for review and approval. So what did we evaluate? For this estimate, we focused on the proposed project as described in DWR's notice of preparation. This included a total capacity of 6,000 CFS with 2 intakes on the Sacramento River near the town of Hood, each at 3,000 CFS capacity. We're 42 miles of 36 diameter tunnel and its associated shafts, and a pump station, forebay, and connecting facilities to the existing California aqueduct just upstream of the Harvey Banks pumping plant. The team adhered to industry standard practices to prepare this assessment as outlined in practice guides of the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering. It was important to the team that we rely on industry standards where possible to help validate our work and improve the consistency throughout the design period. Where we had good project definition and information, we developed costs at an activity level with quantity takeoffs, buildups of materials, labors, and equipment. And where that detail was lacking, but items were known, we utilized allowances to include costs. The risk team developed risk avoidance strategies where appropriate, and these activities were included as line items in the estimate. And then industry standard factors for items such as field management, contractor overhead, and profit were applied to the construction costs. And then after all of the above items were summed, a construction contingency was applied, which was largely based on professional experience. The soft costs, which include nearly all of the non-construction items, were established based on industry standard percentages against the construction estimate. And the environmental mitigation costs, for the purposes of this assessment, were extracted from the previous work. The costs are considered a placeholder at this time until the DWR team has identified the mitigation measures necessary for Delta Conveyance. And because contingency represents a relatively large portion of the construction estimate, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time defining it and how the team developed the values for this project. A common assumption is that contingency is in addition to the construction costs, or sometimes even mistaken as discretionary spending. Contingency in this estimate is actually a component of the expected construction cost, and it represents our best guess at the cost of items that are not shown or known at this time, but based on experience are expected to result in additional costs. As a point of reference, the final drawings of the intakes that will be included in the bid documents will be in the thousands of sheets. However, our current design is summarized today in approximately 100. For Delta Conveyance, each of the design leads work closely with the estimators to develop an appropriate contingency level for their respective features based on their understanding of the maturity in their work, identifying the risks that were remaining, and their own professional judgment. And these values that were selected are shown in the table to the right here. Where the team saw a lot of risk and less complete information, a higher contingency was used. So for example, the utilities, logistics, and the power estimate contained a significant amount of allowances and minimal design drawings at this point. So in this case, it was appropriate to assign a contingency of 50%. In contrast, the pump station is relatively well understood, and there is less perceived risk in the design and construction of this facility at this time. So in this case, a 30% contingency level was assigned. As the DCA continues to advance the design, these contingency levels will decrease to reflect the revelations of unknown items that occur during the process and the collection of additional data that allows us to reduce our risks. So this slide provides a summary of the estimated cost of construction. It's broken down by each of the major program elements. The first cost column is the base cost, which includes each of the construction line items, the allowances, risk mitigations, and the contractor management overheads and profit. And the second column is the contingency applied. And the final column obviously sums those two numbers together for our estimate of each of those elements. As shown, the undiscounted construction estimate is just over $12 billion. This includes nearly $2 billion for the intake facilities, a little over $6 billion in tunneling and shafts, which comprises approximately 50% of this total project construction estimate, $1 billion for the pumping plant, $2 billion for the southern forebay and associated connecting structures to the existing aqueduct, and about $750 million in early works, utilities, and logistics construction. So the first question that many people ask when they receive an estimate is just how accurate do you think this number is? Or another way to say that is how reflective is this number of where you expect to be at design completion? And so for me, it's important that we place this number into its broader context. The AACE, the same standards that we use to develop the estimate, has collected a large volume of historical cost data over a wide array of industries. And they've used this data to develop predictive tools that practitioners can use to assess the expected accuracy of their estimates as compared to the ultimate cost of the project. And they have used this data to create 80% confidence bands for estimates that are developed at various stages of the design process. An 80% confidence band represents a range by which there is an 80% likelihood that the actual project cost, as measured at completion, will fall within this band. And I'll speak more to what this band means in the next slide. So the curve on the left here of this slide depicts the expected accuracy range that the DCA anticipates in our estimate as we move through the design process, all the way from the initiation to completion. As the curve shows, in the early phases of design, there's a fairly wide band of expected accuracy, and as the design evolves, the band narrows. This narrowing in the range of outcomes reflects that greater certainty in the estimated amount that is gained through the detailed engineering process. One thing to note in this curve is that the expected value of the project, as represented by the dotted line in this curve and the 0 percentile level, is expected to hold throughout the process. So in the early phases, higher contingency values are often used to account for the unknowns, while towards the end of design, where more information is known, the estimate of known activities goes up and the contingency is reduced. So based on the assessment of our current state of design, which in this case is fairly early, and the high degree of variability that often occurs in public works construction sector, and the relative complexity of the project, coupled with the level of effort that we've devoted to estimate development, and a number of other factors that are outlined in the procedural manuals, we've placed an 80% confidence band of approximately 50% on the low end and upwards of 80% on the high end. So it's important that we place these confidence intervals into proper context so that this estimate that we've prepared is understood within this context and equally not taken out of context. So to wrap our heads around these confidence bands, it requires us to go back to maybe our first probability class in high school or maybe college and look at a probability curve. So in this case, what the 80% confidence interval means is that the most likely estimate and cost of this project is the 12.1 billion. We've conducted a thorough job estimating the drawings. We've accounted for items not shown with allowances. We've mitigated our risks, and we've added an appropriate level of contingency. This thoroughness is why we believe 12.1 billion is the most likely value of construction. Now, estimating is just that. It's an estimate that tries to predict a future outcome, and things obviously can come up, whether it be an economic downturn that creates a highly competitive market, or tariffs that might raise the cost of steel, or maybe even new regulatory restrictions placed on work windows that add a year of delay. All of these things are possible, and all these things can have a large impact on the ultimate cost of work. And so to account for these possibilities, we place confidence bands on the estimate. But at the far ends of this confidence band that I'm showing here in the figure, there is a much lower likelihood of occurrence of those numbers than in the middle of the band. So while we believe with 80% confidence that the actual cost could be as low as 6 billion and upwards of close to 22 billion, there is only a 10% likelihood that the cost will be on the very low end, and equally only a 10% likelihood that the number would be on that higher end. Again, the most likely value is 12.1 billion. So while I can't stop someone from misinterpreting the data that I'm showing here, it would be incorrect to say that there is an equal chance that the cost would be 22 billion as it would be 12 billion. That statement's just simply not true. So after that relatively lengthy expose on the construction estimate and development of contingency and our confidence interval on the construction estimate, I want to shift to the remaining elements of the cost estimate, which focuses on the soft costs. The soft costs are a substantial part of the overall capital cost of the project. In the public works sector, they often end up being somewhere around 1/4 to 1/3 of the overall program costs. So for Delta Conveyance, we used industry standard factors for soft costs, which are often expressed as a percentage of the construction cost. So the table here to the right on this slide shows each of the categories of soft costs that the DCA included in our estimate. And these are the activities that will be required of the DCA in the delivery of the program, and the percentages of the construction value that was applied to estimate each of these items. So for example, the Program Management Office, which includes all of the functions of the DCA that support the entire organization, typically accounts from anywhere to 2 to 5% of construction. But for the Delta Conveyance Office, we chose a value of 3.5%. This value considers the economies of scale that are achieved with a very large program, and it's balanced with the enhanced management needed to navigate the significant number of complexities to this program. So in total, the services and the land acquisition soft costs identified in this table sums up to 28% of the overall construction, or 28% of the construction costs. So when we take into account each of the items that we've discussed, the construction costs, the soft costs, and the environmental mitigations, we get the total undiscounted cost of the program. And that total, shown in this table here, sums to just under 16 billion. And as you can see, approximately 75% of the total program costs are in the construction of the tunnel and associated infrastructure, while the remaining 25% are in the soft costs and the mitigation measures. So this slide shows the major design evolutions that have occurred in the past year as the DCA team has advanced our concept design. During the early stages of any type of project, design changes such as these are more common than in the later stages. There will also likely be changes that come out of the environmental assessment and from various regulatory conditions and obligations placed on the project during this concept phase. So again, this is just a snapshot in time. Each of the items in this table contributed to significant cost differences in the estimate. In some cases, the changes reduce costs, such as the removal of the intermediate forebay. The engineering surge analysis determined that that wasn't a necessary component of the overall system, while other advancements added costs, such as enhancements to the ground improvements and foundation designs in several of the facilities to help manage the soft ground conditions and the high groundwater table in many of the areas along the alignment. Another area focused by the team over the past year has been on logistics. How do we move goods and services throughout the Delta given current traffic levels and the high volume of material that we need to move around and reach the sites? So this has led to the inclusion of some additional logistics improvements such as road upgrades and a new rail spur in some key locations to relieve traffic loads and to facilitate the DCA's ability to move goods and services around in congested areas. We've also added things like new batch plants that will allow on-site production of concrete, a significant contributor to reducing traffic volumes, but also aids in our ability to complete the work. So what are our next steps in preparing a final budget for the program that we will need to submit to DWR and to this board for review and approval? First, we will be periodically updating this board on any major changes that occur in design that have a significant impact on our assessment of costs. Some of the key things that will likely result in some cost changes are completion of our first round of geotechnical exploration work. Secondly, we will need to wait until we're through with the environmental planning process so that we more clearly understand what the final proposed configuration of the program will be. Right now, we have several alternatives that we're looking at, and as well gaining insight onto the final environmental mitigation measures and updating those numbers. We'll also need to work with DWR and others to add the additional soft cost items that are outside the oversight and work of the DCA and have not been included in this estimate. This might include things like the Community Benefit Fund and DWR planning costs. And finally, as I had mentioned, we'll need to adjust this undiscounted estimate to account for the time value of money by determining the expected value of each of the future contracts in the expected year of procurement. So that concludes the presentation, and I'm glad to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that very detailed and excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from members of the board? Hearing none. Again, thank you very much for the presentation.
Director Atwater, we do have 2 public comments on this item.
Okay. Go ahead and let's have the first one.
Okay, James, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, James Watcher?
Yes, hi, this is James Thurwachter. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. James Thurwachter with the California Alliance for Jobs. We represent over 2,000 heavy construction companies and over 80,000 union construction workers from Bakersfield to the Oregon border. And we advocate for responsible investments in public infrastructure projects. We want to thank the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority for your effort to move this project forward. The preliminary cost assessment provided today is a helpful baseline to gauge the size and scope of the project. The Alliance is a long-term supporter of efforts to modernize the state's water distribution infrastructure. The Delta Conveyance Project is of vital importance to protecting California's water supplies against the numerous threats it faces from the impacts of climate change. Our current water infrastructure is not prepared for the new normal, such as more extreme swings in weather, like prolonged periods of drought and severe rain, snow, and flooding. Further, the concern about the integrity of our levees during an earthquake are always front of mind. We need to move forward with this project. We cannot wait for a disaster to strike before taking steps to secure our water supply. These are real, credible threats to our water security, and the time is now to make the necessary upgrades before it's too late. We look forward to seeing this project through to completion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Director Atwater, is Kyle Griffith.
Yep, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. It looks like I was, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kyle Griffith, and I am here to provide comments on behalf of Californians for Water Security. We represent more than 80 organizations representing small businesses, family farms, infrastructure advocates, labor unions, and others in support of the Governor's Delta Conveyance Project. 2/3 of Californians rely on water transported through our state's main distribution infrastructure, but this aging system of pipes, pumps, and century-old levees is in desperate need of an overhaul. The preliminary cost assessment gives us a sense of what will be required to help protect the water supplies for millions of Californians. We support moving forward with modernizing our Delta Conveyance system to improve the reliability of our water system, protect against natural disasters, and prepare for the climate change. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing this project finally completed.
Thank you for those comments.
Hi, this is OSHA. I actually requested to speak on this item as well.
I apologize for that, OSHA. I didn't see that come through.
I filled out the form. It allows you to put more than one item on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I tried to follow it. Thank you. May I go now, President Atwater?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I just have thank you for presenting this information. I assume the PowerPoint will be made available. I didn't see it in the packet so far. You could want to take a look at it. I think my concern is that this is a massive investment being proposed in infrastructure that I do not believe is resilient. There's a huge opportunity cost in not pursuing other more resilient and less harmful alternatives that would also create jobs. Those alternatives have been suggested in the scoping process for this environmental review, as well as in the prior iterations of the project. Unfortunately, we learned at the last SEC meeting that those alternatives would not be even analyzed in the environmental document with any degree of particularity, and they certainly won't be analyzed in terms of comparing the costs as well. So, and I think in addition to the costs that were described as being included in this recent effort to estimate costs, it should also take into account all of the sunk costs from the prior iterations of this project. Overall, because of the massive opposition to this project, both locally, regionally, statewide, and even nationally, from environmental and all different kinds of groups, you know, this project is unlikely to go forward. Other options should be pursued, and I think the cost estimate provided all is, is probably incorrect. It's probably a lot higher than that, and it certainly doesn't take into account the costs on the communities or the environment. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Let's move on then. If we don't have any other public comments, and go to 7.
Oh, I just had a comment, President Atwater. Hi, I just wanted to, it's funny sometimes when you say, are there any questions from the board, and we're all just sitting here. I want people to know that it's not that we don't have an interest, it's just that we saw these ahead of time, and when we had questions, we asked them and got them answered. So it's not through lack of interest or lack of thinking about it, just so people know.
Appreciate that. That's very much, we do a lot of homework before we get to these board meetings. That's good. So let's go to 7D, the Stakeholder Engagement Committee update. I'm just going to give that update.
That's me, Nesli Parvizi. Hi, everybody.
Thank you.
First of all, I hope everybody is safe and sound. I know that either fires or smoke are affecting a lot of communities. So, I remember in March when the COVID orders came down, I thought, I'm so glad this is happening before fire season. And now the joke's on all of us, it seems. So here's hoping you're all feeling safe and can breathe well. I'm going to go through a little bit. You have the section 3 on stakeholder engagement. Our last meeting was on July 22nd, and Carrie Buckman from DWR took some time to update us on DWR's environmental process, as well as gave us information about the design alternatives for the proposed Delta Conveyance project. And she did that, we always try to stay in our very narrow lane of design and engineering considerations, but wanted to point out one of the reasons why that came up was for the purpose of explaining why some alternatives will receive evaluation in the EIR, and that often that means that DCA will have to do some work, engineering design work around exploring some of those alternatives. We also, you just heard from Graham, he also gave an update on some of the feedback. As I've mentioned this over and over, we have this new sort of cadence where we get feedback from the SEC as well as other members of the public, and try to respond to it, whether it's about traffic, optimizing site footprints, minimizing construction activity, and came up with, I think the project has changed a good bit, actually. Probably not in ways that people kind of care about in the overall big picture, I think, but from a construction and design and engineering perspective, community feedback has been super helpful. We've been able to reduce a lot of work, reduce a lot of traffic, maximize restoration of ag land. So all really important things. And then responding to something that had come up a few times, and to provide some clarity, Steve Manassian, our chief engineer, explained why soil conditioners were needed. This is part of our discussion around the reusable tunnel material, which is also known as muck. It's kind of what comes out of the tunneling machine. And there's been a lot of questions about that. So Steve came to give a presentation and kind of clear up as much as possible for folks how soil conditioners are used and how they're utilized and their makeup. That was not clear to some people. Just so folks know, by the next SEC meeting, which will be on Wednesday, this Wednesday, we will have our virtual tours up, which we're very glad to have up. And in terms of what's on the agenda for next week, I want to bring up, I think the thing I'm going to talk about the most is, I think that what we are most looking forward to is we've had some requests from SEC members on an opportunity for them to actually engage with one another. It's a Brown Act body. SEC members are actually barred from speaking to each other en masse. But our meetings are dense. They often go over 3 hours. And I think we really want to make sure that the SEC has time to reflect, which is something that they had asked about. So we're going to spend actually our first hour of our SEC meeting giving the SEC members a chance to talk about the process. I think one of the things that we'd really like to know about, again, we're going to try to be as free about the conversation as possible, but we're also really looking to kind of get a look back at what we've been discussing. There are things that, again, the meetings have been so dense. There are things that, people haven't been clear on or have forgotten about or have sort of brought up again that we already went over. So what's really clear is that we need kind of a review and also the opportunity to figure out what more do we need to know about, what kind of information do we need to go over, similar to what Steve Manassian did with the soil conditioners. I think there's things like that now that people have had a chance to kind of sit on that information, take a look at it and digest it a little bit. There's still a lot of questions that come up. So looking forward to that. The next couple months of the SEC meetings are really going to be SEC led in terms of the topics that folks want to cover, which I think will be great, since so much of the beginning part of the SEC was us just kind of doing a data dump on all of the stuff, all of the facilities and sites and whatnot that we had to get that information over to DWR for their EIC. So it'll be nice to kind of see a little bit of a flip in that way. And I believe that is it. I'm trying to remember. What last thing I want to mention is we did have a tour last week. We were able to do in-person, socially distanced of an intake screen facility. That was something that the SEC mentioned, and fortuitously enough, I think one of the largest producers of T-screen intakes happens to be a local business located right in the Delta. And so a few of our SEC members and some of our staff were able to go outdoors, masked, socially distanced, but I thought it was nice to be able to do something like that. We were supposed to have another small community meeting tomorrow, which unfortunately got canceled because of air conditions. But we did take video of the T-screen. So anybody who's really into the technical information that we present and whatnot, this is a factory. There's no, procurement hasn't happened. The project doesn't happen, but it was nice that people were interested in this local business and that they were able to give a tour. So if anyone else on the board cares deeply about certain types of T-screens, that video will be up on our website, hopefully in a week or so. All right, here's wishing you all health and safety.
Thank you very much, Nestle. Appreciate the concise presentation. Any questions from members of the board?
I just have a comment on Nasli and Valerie Martinez. I wanted to say how much they really do work with the SEC, and they work with getting the information to a point where it's made available to the SEC members, and kind of acting as intermediaries sometimes between the information and the SEC members to make it easier for people to understand and access. And again, I just cannot stress enough how important their contribution to this whole process has been. So thank you.
Really kind of you. I think we're definitely thinking, it doesn't seem like we will be moving away from virtual meetings, at least by December. So, there's definitely a challenge there. We're doing our best, but obviously I don't think any of us try to rest on our laurels. It is interesting to see some of the more innovative ways that people are trying to figure out how to communicate virtually. And we are thinking about that as well. And, we'll see how the discussion goes on Wednesday, but, I've been sort of looking at different tools that help kind of get everyone's feelings literally up on paper, allow people to sort of go into small groups virtually and things like that. But it's nice to think about all those things as this becomes the new normal for the foreseeable future, hopefully for not much more than that. But thank you, Director Palmer.
Any other questions from the members of the board? Or seeing none, why don't we move on to 7E? That's a presentation on Stakeholder Engagement Committee member input. Do we have anybody scheduled to give a presentation to us today?
I am so sorry. I should have said that from the get-go. It's a volunteer activity, and we always call it voluntold, but we tried our best, and no one volunteered for this week. Hopefully that means someone's taking some well-deserved time.
Yeah, I have a presentation for the SEC update, and Claudia was hoping I could share the screen.
Okay, great.
Great.
Catherine, it's perfect.
All right, that's the last one. Let's close that out. All right. Okay, let me try that again. Sorry about that. So can you see the screen?
Yep.
Is it working?
It's still not on presentation mode. It's, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a bit slow coming off of our system here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as Natalie said, we don't have a representative from the SEC today, so I thought I would use the time to highlight some of the work that the DCA has done with the committee to demonstrate how their input has been incorporated in our work. So there are about 20 members of the committee. They represent a wide array of Delta interests. They give hours of their time each month reviewing the material, participating in marathon meetings that often go beyond the 3-hour schedule. And while it's clear that most of the members are opposed to the project, maybe all, they continue to share their opinions and their insights in the event that should the project happen, they want to make it better. We understand that for many, this is not an easy concession, which speaks to their commitment to their communities. And on behalf of the DCA, we're especially grateful for all of the time and energy that they put into this process. So the presentation I'm going to share is intended to cover some of the highlights and changes that we've made in the design, largely based on conversations with the committee. At each meeting, we gain a better understanding of the critical issues to people in the Delta, and we circle back to the drawing board looking for ways that we could address these concerns. So I'm going to hit on a couple of examples that we've made in these 6 areas that garnered a significant amount of discussion and feedback during the meetings. And for each of these, I'll provide examples of one or more of how we've addressed their comments. Again, it's not intended to be inclusive, but rather to highlight some of the more significant adaptations. So we'll begin with barging. Many members of the committee, including David Glosky, for example, boat in the area and believe that the frequent barging might detract from recreational uses in the Delta. We took a close look at the use of barging to Bolden Island for materials delivery versus using Highway 12. And we believe that we can meet our program objectives better by expanding Highway 12 rather than utilizing the barge landing on the island. So we also eliminated the barge landing that we had included on the eastern alignment at the South Roberts site in favor of rail. So at this point, there's no major barging operations as part of the program. So let's move on to construction space. We spent a lot of time going through the footprints that were needed in the program for each of the sites. And a common comment for members was, let's try to minimize how much land is used, particularly agricultural land. So here's an example. This is one of the largest sites in the program. It's the Twin Cities Launch Shaft site. And we took a hard look at the space requirements and determined that we could substantially reduce our space needs by switching to a mechanical drying process rather than the very land intensive natural drying process for drying out our reusable tunnel material. That material requires drying to remove the excess moisture so that we can use it for the structural fill. And we plan to take that material that will be generated at this site down to the southern forebay for building the levee walls. So this is an example where we were able to shift, change to a different type of technology and for that better serves our program, but also helps reduce the land that we need for ultimate construction. Another issue, besides just minimizing the land used for construction, was how do we restore impacted land after construction, particularly agricultural land. So as Graham mentioned in his presentation, it's one of the areas that the GEI team studied. The figure here shows a yellow boundary, and that's our construction space requirements, while the red line shows the final space needs of the site. So it's that land that I'm showing in checkered, where we worked with agricultural scientists to develop plans for restoring this land for either agricultural use or for natural area development. And I want to thank Lindsay Levees who was particularly helpful in helping set up a meeting with the Sac County Farm Bureau, who reviewed our plans and provided really valuable feedback that we've incorporated into our approach. Logistics and traffic, obviously a major concern to many members of the panel. It's obviously a quality of life factor, and we dedicated an entire session to reviewing our estimated traffic loads, and we've had several follow-up discussions to help optimize our plan. So the next few slides highlight some of our efforts to reduce these loads. And it really provides a dual benefit. It reduces traffic loads in the Delta, but it also helps us to move materials around more easily. So we'll start with the shaft construction. One of the things we noticed when we looked at the traffic histograms was there were some significant spikes related to shifting borrow material to the site to help build the shaft pads that encircle the shaft sites. So we went back and found ways to both reduce the diameter of our shafts as well as lower the working surface height. And that substantially cut the amount of borrow material that we needed to bring to the site, approximately by half, which by extension then cut the traffic in half. And we did that across the whole program for the shaft sites. We talked a little bit about the use of Highway 12 for bringing materials to the Bolden Island site. On the left-hand side, you see the existing level of service on State Route 12, and for many times of the day, it's up in the area of level of service E, which is close to gridlock at some points. And by adding the extra lane, the Highway 12 stays within a level of service A, which means a benefit to the Delta in terms of being able to avoid the traffic jams that occur on that highway, but also ensure us that we can get timely deliveries to the site. Highway 4 was also an area with a significant amount of traffic. Also has a fairly curvy bridge that goes over the old river. And Karen Mann on the committee was kind enough to send us a photo of a jackknife truck trying to make that curve, which she says is a common problem in the area. So one of the things that we did with that feedback was we optimized our drive links and found that we could eliminate the Victoria Island maintenance shaft that was right along California 4, which reduces our load on 4 and also avoids any kind of truck traffic from the program going over that old river bridge. And then as a small aside, it minimizes the amount of agricultural land that we would need to acquire to build that shaft site. And then Byron Highway, this is actually where some of the worst traffic levels of any of the major highways in the Delta are observed. And a significant amount of our facilities, the entire southern complex, is located right along that highway. So this graph here shows the benefits of adding the rail to the southern forebase site, and that's the blue lines. In contrast, the orange lines represent what traffic counts would look like if we didn't have the rail and all materials were transported by truck on Byron Highway. But one of the things that we noticed in the meeting where we presented these histograms is those spikes that you see in that year 3 of construction. And those were the transport of excess borrow material from the construction of the hydraulic facilities that are on the south side of Byron Highway and transporting them along the highway and to the north of the highway to help build the embankments. So this graph here now shows our current plan. Because of that spike, we added a bridge over the highway right near Bruns Way, and we were able to peel all of that traffic off of the highway and cross over with a simple bridge. The gray there is the former graph with the rail line, and then the purple is now our new plan here. But we also were able to reduce traffic in the outer years by shifting a lot of the riprap deliveries that'll be needed on the outside banks of the forebay from truck traffic onto rail. So significant improvements here, and a lot of concern on the committee around adding any additional traffic on Byron Highway. So proximity to natural areas was also a major area of discussion, in particular the Stone Lakes Refuge as well as the Woodbridge Ecological Reserve. And this map shows the boundaries of the Stone Lakes Refuge. And as you can see, the major facilities of the program, particular the intakes to the west, and then the Twin Cities launch shaft, straddle the current boundaries. And access to the intakes will require truck traffic crossing through those boundaries. So some of the things that we did, first we tried to remove as many of the facilities to outside the boundaries as was feasible. So in our original scheme for the Twin Cities material site, we had planned to build the Glanville launch shaft site about a half-mile away from our materials depot where the rail spur would drop off materials. That would require us to truck the segmental liners from the materials depot over the launch shaft, and likewise convey the RTM out of the launch shaft back to the materials depot where the material could get dried. But after further study, we felt that shifting the Glanville shaft onto the Twin Cities property provided significant operational benefit by consolidating all of the liner and RTM management to a single location, and then also benefited the refuge by removing a major structure with significant truck traffic and conveyor noise out of the boundaries of the refuge. Animation, look at that. So we also had several iterations on the haul routes from the I-5 corridor and the Twin Cities Material Depot over to the intake sites, and narrowed in on the following plan. A park and ride at Hood Franklin so that employees to the intake sites would be transported by electric bus over to the intake sites. That relieves a significant amount of the car traffic. It also shrinks the sites of the intakes by not having to provide employee parking there. We also selected Lambert Road as the sole road that crosses through the refuge boundary. There had been a number of plans where we were distributing it amongst the 3 roads that cut from I-5 toward the intakes, but reached consensus that using a single road for that would have the least amount of impact. And it serves us well. There's an exit off of I-5 right at Twin Cities that takes us to the materials depot, and then you can cut over to Lambert onto new haul roads over to the intake sites. Another example, we had a maintenance shaft located in between the 2 tracks of the Woodbridge Ecological Reserve, and we worked with Sean Worth, who helped us relocate this shaft a mile north of the reserve boundaries and closer to an existing road off of I-5, Peltier, which reduces our construction impacts to the reserve, but also provides better access for us for construction. And the final topic I want to touch on is the safety concerns of the RTM conditioners. So these conditioners are a necessary component of the tunnel drilling process. It allows the drilled material to pass easily through the cutter head and into the conveyors so that the material can be transported out of the tunnel. And several members of the committee expressed concern over the application of this compound to the cutter head and the impact that it might have to any underground residuals. So we conducted additional research on the latest compositions of these components, and we're able to commit to using a highly biodegradable material with only natural-based polymers. And at the time of construction, all the compounds will be tested for conformance with our requirements. And we'll also do additional testing and studies during the tunnel design phase to just validate our specifications. So that concludes the presentation. And just one last comment that I again want to thank all of the SEC members who have contributed to this process. It's been very helpful and appreciative. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions of the board.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Do we have any questions?
I have a question. Actually, it's more of a comment. It strikes me as I'm looking through this that there are several things which would improve certain infrastructure throughout through various portions of the Delta. And as we get to the point of where we're not looking, as DCA comes up with their CEQA analysis, it would be really useful to see a list of the things that this project is contributing in terms of permanent infrastructure improvements because of the project itself. So I'm just very interested to see how much improvement in traffic ultimately, and improvement maybe in jobs, that type of thing. So I look forward to looking at that information as well.
Good suggestion. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to agenda item 8, staff reports and announcements.
We may have public comment.
Do we have any public comment?
We do not, Director Atwater.
Great.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Well, then we will move on to agenda item 8, staff reports and announcements. Does Josh, you have a general counsel's report or?
Yeah, thanks, President Atwater. My written report is in your packet at item A8. The big item for me this month was the JPA amendment, and thank you for approving that on the agenda.
Yeah.
Happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions, Josh? If not, we'll move on to 8B, the treasurer's report.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Katana.
Hi. So I'm going to just quickly summarize, probably more than I usually do for this item, because we have a couple changes. So we ended July 31st with $733,240,000. Subsequently, around August 14th, received some money from the DCO and paid a few bills, and we ended up with $3.6 million in the fund as of that date. Additionally, we talked to our auditors about the CIP program. As you know, we had these projects as capitalized, but because we still do not really have a project or fully have a project, usually you capitalize within a year, but this has gone on longer. So we had to reinstate and expense a lot of our CIP. So as of June 30, 2020, we have expensed current state of Delta Conveyance project because they do not meet the gap criteria. But we have left the California Water Fix project. We have not reinstated that. We will be working with Catherine and staff to get that criteria analyzed by our auditors. And at this point, we have not gotten to a conclusion on capitalizing the portion of that cost, which were incurred June 30, 2019. So with that, as of July 31, 2020, total accounts payables were a little over $3.8 million, and total net position for the DCA was $8.5 million. We attached, item 1 is the attachment of all the invoices, aging schedules, accounts receivables, and the project to date schedule. Additionally, we have attachment 2, which consists of budget versus actual by appropriation through July 2020. Year to date, actual expenses were a little lower, by about $2.5 million, a little delay. From budget mainly, we're told because of engineering and technical work stemming from county litigation, current restraints on field work activities due to state and county mandates. So we're tracking that a little lower than normal, which is not maybe a bad thing for the project, but that means we just haven't spent those dollars. So that's my report. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
You're muted, Rich.
Sorry, I muted myself. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just saying that you were muted, so we couldn't hear what your response was.
Yeah. Very good.
Catano, thank you for a great report. I also want to note that whatever you've done to improve.
Somebody's talking, I can't hear.
You get closer to your mic.
Whatever you've done to improve your sound and your ends worked really well. Okay, I guess my headphones aren't working. Sorry.
I'll translate, Katana. Whatever you've done to improve your system, it worked well today. You were very clear.
Oh, I got a new computer. So what happened?
That's it.
Oh, hey,
Magic.
there you go.
Yes, I switched out my old computer.
Uh-oh. Got some odd noises going on. All right. Any other questions of Katana? If not, do we have any other verbal reports? If not, we can move on to agenda item 9, future agenda items. Do we have any requests for future agenda items? Seeing none, or not hearing any, it's all quiet, then we are ready to adjourn. Thank you very much for the meeting today.
Great. See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Read safe.
Take care.
Don't run outside. Don't run outside.
That's for sure. Bye.
Bye, everyone.